Tonight on Brian Ross Investigates.
But I need the help of the United States government.
New developments in the case of former FBI agent Robert Levinson, kidnapped in Iran 12 years ago and still missing.
Please help me get home.
With a new reward of $25 million, his family now says there's reason for hope. Plus the spy games.
I don't have to speak with you.
The same watchdog group which caught a spy trying to infiltrate their operation out with a new report on how operators used WhatsApp to track hundreds of human rights workers and journalists.
There is an industry valued in the billions that spends every day trying to find ways to access our mobile phones.
And our shout out for the man behind the scenes who quietly made possible a team of reporters documenting the plight of Americans in Appalachia.
Do you still drink your tap water, or is this solely what you drink?
It's hard to find out just how important a force he was in Appalachia.
From the Law&Crime Network studios in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening and welcome. Tonight, new developments in the mystery of what happened to an American last seen alive in Iran some 12 years ago. Former FBI agent Robert Levinson, who was quietly working for the CIA when he disappeared. As his family prepares to sue Iran in U.S. federal court next month, the Iranian government this week, for the first time, seemed to acknowledge there was an ongoing case involving Levinson, a statement that offered new hope that Levinson might still be alive, only later to have the government say its comments were being misinterpreted. Still, as we are about to hear, his family believes there is much reason for hope. He went missing in Iran on March 9, 2007, last seen alive on the Iranian island of Kish. 3 years later, his family received this distressing video proof of life, with Levinson pleading for help.
But I need the help of the United States government to answer the requests of the group that has held me for 3.5 years. And please help me get home.
Since then, his family has waged a relentless campaign to seek any information about the former FBI agent.
My name is David Levinson, and I'm speaking on behalf of my mother, Christine Levinson, and my entire family. I am making a plea to the people that are holding my father. My mother has received your messages. Please tell us your demands so we can work together to bring my father home safely.
Iranian officials have repeatedly denied knowing anything about Levinson's whereabouts.
You mentioned a person that I've never heard of.
Mr.
Levinson, we don't know where he is, who he is.
But this week in Tehran, officials acknowledged for the first time there is an ongoing case involving Levinson, later revising the statement to say it was a missing persons case. In Washington, the State Department has now upped a reward offer for information on Levinson to $25 million. And President Trump was quick to offer his encouragement for Iran to do something. If Iran is able to turn over to the U.S. kidnapped former FBI agent Robert A. Levinson, who has been missing in Iran for 12 years, it would be a very positive step, the president tweeted. And we're joined now by Bob Levinson's son, Dan, who joins us from Skype overseas, and here in the studio by Barry Meier, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who chronicled the saga of Levinson in the book Missing Man. Dan, let me start with you. What's the latest you have on the status of your father?
Well, as you noted, the Iranian government responded to the UN working group we have been working with, and they said it was an ongoing case. And specifically, they said that it was in the Revolutionary Court. And to our understanding, that is the type of court where it's criminal cases, espionage cases, similar to the ones that they have been targeting with the Iranian Americans who have been held there as well. So for us, this is a significant development, and acknowledges that he's been over there and that he's been kidnapped.
Well, there really was never any doubt that he was there, but the fact they now are saying that this was a missing person case, not an ongoing prosecution, has that thrown some cold water on your hopes?
It hasn't. As I said, the Revolutionary Court is a very specific court, and that from what our lawyer has told us, that there are no missing persons cases in that country. And it would be hard to believe that in a security state such as Iran and on the small island of Kish, which my mother and I visited, that there could be any source of missing persons in that country.
Barry Meier, let me ask you, what do you make of this development?
You know, I agree with Dan in that there certainly aren't missing persons in Iran. This is an autocratic government that knows where everyone is, and I'm sure they know exactly what happened to Bob Levinson, where Bob Levinson was kept, and hopefully where he's still being kept. I don't know personally how to interpret this sort of cryptic one-line sentence that appears in the report, other than to say that I hope there is someone out there that can shed more light on this case, because Dan and his family have been suffering for these past 12 years.
And as a practical matter, do you think there is some hope?
Well, there's always hope. You know, the thing that is concerning is that for now, I guess 8 years since the videotapes and the photographs have arrived, we have not received any new information. That doesn't mean that Bob is not still alive, but what it suggests to me is that there is a very tightly knit group that has knowledge about his fate and his whereabouts. And hopefully $20 million will be sufficient for one member of that group to realize that telling the family, telling the US government what happened to Bob is worth the risk.
Dan Levinson, a question for you from our control room from executive producer Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda, what's your question?
Dan, what's this been like for your family? We've heard reports your father was dead. Must be a roller coaster.
It absolutely is. There are ups and downs. We never lose hope, but of course it can be discouraging. I would say the events of this past week, given the $25 million total reward, the Iranian response, President Trump's tweet, they've all been encouraging and significant developments, and we're hoping that they will lead to increased communications between our two governments to resolve his case and get him home.
Dan, what's been the response in the Trump administration to your father's plight?
They have been very dedicated, and we've worked very closely with Robert O'Brien, who was formerly he was the special envoy for hostage affairs, now the national security advisor, and he's very concerned about the case, and he's in touch with us regularly. Secretary Pompeo has been wonderful because he has taken an interest long before he was in his roles now. So they have been very responsive. We think that their increased pressure on Iran is going to be helpful for us as well.
Do you see a possible diplomatic solution to this, given the relationship between the two countries now is so bad?
We're hopeful. I think it's going to come down to something between the two governments. This is what we've always been told, and I think we work with all kinds of actors within this environment, but I think it's going to come down to the U.S. and Iran talking about it and making some sort of deal.
Barry, as you know, there are all sorts of people that go out there and try to sell information. They can be hustlers and, really bad people.
Right.
But they take advantage of people like the Levinson family.
Well, I mean, I in the book, you kind of follow this retinue of people who are going out there trying to find information, trying to get money to find information. In the last few years, more of them have stepped forward. I have only one hope. And that's for the Levinson family, for Bob's wife, for Bob's children, for his grandchildren, for everyone involved. And that is that there is someone out there. Forget about these governments. But there is an individual out there who will be tempted by the money put on the table to come forward, tell the truth, let this family know what has happened, and if Bob is alive, how he can be brought home. This has been a terrible story. It's been a tragedy. And to allow this tragedy to continue is just awful. And it's pointless. It serves no point.
And Dan, final question for you, 30 seconds or so. What's the next step for your family?
Well, we're going to continue to press this case. We have a lawsuit against Iran in Washington that starts next month, the trial. We're going to work with the U.S. government. We're going to work with the Trump administration and make sure that he's not forgotten. We have a lot that we can work with now, and we're going to continue to press the Iranians. We're not going away, and they have to know that.
Well, Dan Levinson, thank you very much for being with us. And Barry Meier, thank you also for being here.
My pleasure, Brian.
Joining us, and come back anytime to keep us all posted on the search for a man who put his life on the line for his country. Next up, the spy games. The private companies hired to spy on human rights activists, journalists, and political opponents. When we return. Back now with an update on our reporting about the spy games, the secretive world of private intelligence companies who have been caught red-handed going after journalists, political opponents, and human rights advocates. One watchdog group called Citizen Lab is out with a new report this week on how one such group was hacking into the phones of its targets around the world. It's something, by the way, that Citizen Lab knows a lot about, especially after they themselves became the target of corporate spies. The setting was a five-star hotel in New York City. The host for lunch, a man using the name of Michael Lambert. The target was John Scott Railton, the head of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, a watchdog group which has been investigating how the Saudi government and others have been cracking down on dissidents. But Railton knew something was fishy about this meeting. Someone was trying to spy on his group, and he invited reporters from the Associated Press to watch as he tried to turn the tables.
I don't have to speak with you.
Well, actually, I think you'll want to, because my colleague was visiting your company this morning, and, you know, it's very strange. She says it doesn't exist.
The man refused to say who he really worked for.
Seems like a little while ago now that you and I were last speaking about Tango in New York being followed around by a bunch of spooks for hire.
And yet you have continued your own investigation into this Wild West world of private intelligence gathering.
That's exactly right. Well, I think, you know, if you want to get the attention of an investigator or a journalist, target them directly, and they'll get very interested in you pretty quickly.
And what have you discovered in your latest episode?
So the most recent work that we've actually been doing involves work by me and my colleagues at the Citizen Lab, tracking the proliferation of NSO's technology. Now, NSO is an Israeli-based company that sells technologies for remotely hacking mobile phones. And back in May, there was a public announcement that WhatsApp, the technology messaging company owned by Facebook, had been used to deliver spyware to a large number of individuals' phones. Since that time, we worked with WhatsApp and with some data from WhatsApp to try to understand who those victims were, who the targets were of this hacking. Most recently.
And how many were there?
Well, WhatsApp announced that there were about 1,400 individuals whose mobile phones had been targeted with this technology. And based on research done by myself and my colleagues at Citizen Lab, we estimate that at least 100 of them are pretty clearly journalists, human rights defenders, and others. But that number has been growing since the public announcement.
And the spying was done on behalf of whom?
Well, this is a great question. So NSO Group, the company that manufactures this technology and distributes it, says, you know what? We sell to governments. What they do with it is really their business. WhatsApp, however, didn't just announce that this happened. They actually have taken NSO to court in California, and their lawsuit is really interesting. Part of what's interesting about that lawsuit is that it pierces the bubble that NSO had created, which said, well, we don't really know how our technology is being used. What WhatsApp's lawsuit lays out is that it appears that NSO is directly involved in the use of its technology, and so would know a lot more about how that technology is being used and abused.
In a statement about the lawsuit, the NSO Group said, in the strongest possible terms, we dispute the allegations and will vigorously fight them. Our technology is not designed or licensed for use against human rights activists and journalists. It has helped to save thousands of lives over recent years. What do you say to that?
What we see is that that narrative gets trotted out again and again in the face of a mountain of evidence that there are clear-cut cases of abuse. Journalists, human rights defenders, their family members, members of opposition political groups, not only occasionally targeted, but pretty much always targeted when a government gets their hands on this technology.
This is a civil lawsuit they filed, but isn't there a crime here?
Well, that's a great question. And it certainly appears that there may be criminal investigations ongoing as well.
Have you been contacted by the FBI?
Citizen Lab can't comment on investigative things that have not yet been made public. I think that the problem comes down to this. At the end of the day, there is an industry valued in the billions that spends every day trying to find ways to access our mobile phones, whether it's through chat apps or whether it's through some other vulnerability that we don't yet know about.
Well, John, thank you very much, and keep up the good work. Be interesting to talk to you in the months to come about what is the latest in this case.
Absolutely, and with pleasure. Always great questions.
Up next, our shout out for the man who quietly helped to make possible some amazing investigative journalism in America's Appalachia region.
Careful breathing this in.
And our shout out tonight for one of the great champions of investigative journalism, Tom Galloway, who passed away earlier this year. A prominent lawyer, he quietly helped to support journalists around the world who were committed to taking truth to power, especially in his beloved Appalachia, where he grew up poor, never forgetting those who remain trapped in a place where powerful interests oppress and abuse. It was a project that no one news organization had been able to take on. A sweeping indictment of how and why so many people in America's Appalachian region had no safe, reliable source of clean drinking water.
How long would you say you've been coming here, sir?
Reporters from 3 different outlets came together for the project. From the Charleston Gazette-Mail.
My name is Katie Coyne. I'm a reporter at the Charleston Gazette-Mail.
West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
I'm Molly Bourne. I work with West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
And the Lexington Herald-Leader.
My name is Will Wright. I work for the Lexington Herald-Leader. This project especially dives into things that affect people's daily life. Access to water is something that many people don't even think about.
Spending months traveling across West Virginia and Kentucky.
Water should be clear and odorless. And that's something we don't have here and haven't for a very long time. If you turn on your tap and it's white and it smells like chlorine, that's not good.
It was a journalistic tour de force, all made possible by one wealthy lawyer whose only credit was a short screen credit at the end of the video acknowledging the Galloway Foundation, chaired by Tom Galloway, who died earlier this year.
I think he really understood poverty. I think he understood some of the really intense struggles that happen in places like where he grew up in Appalachia, and he had a very deep sense of wanting to give back.
Charlie Sennett runs the Ground Truth Project that spearheaded the water investigation.
Tom understood the power of journalism from his very earliest days as a lawyer, where he took on big coal and really went after some of the companies that were really destroying the environment and treating people very unfairly in the communities where they were based.
As a successful lawyer, Galloway was later involved in going after the misdeeds at the corrupt energy company Enron.
He funded projects about human rights and LGBT rights in Africa.
Brian Ross from ABC News 2020.
He followed up on the reporting that Rhonda Schwartz and I did at ABC News about the treatment of garment factory workers in sweatshops in the American territory of the Northern Marianas. Blocked fire exits, overheated electrical panels, toilets that don't work. What authorities called flagrant violations of U.S. labor and safety laws. Part of a legal team that later got a $20 million settlement for some 30,000 workers. But Galloway's passion was for Appalachia, where he grew up in poverty, and then first emerged as a lawyer speaking up for the little guy.
Tom really dedicated his entire career to trying to help those people who are underserved. Telling their story became part of that work. Journalism became a critical appendage to all of the legal work that he did in a way that could tell a story that he wouldn't necessarily be able to tell in the courtroom.
Galloway's backing has already helped to fund major investigations at West Virginia's leading newspaper, the Gazette-Mail, at a time the paper was in financial straits, according to reporter Ken Ward.
Tom Galloway's legacy for Appalachia is not just all of the litigation he did to bring bad guys to justice, but it's the journalism that's going to live on for years and years and years giving people the kind of information they need about their community. We have 2 reporters in our newsroom now that are funded by them, and at a time when advertising revenues are dropping and it's difficult to keep staff up, those kind of resources, 2 additional reporters, one of them dedicated to covering Southern West Virginia, and the other one dedicated to covering poverty issues in Southern West Virginia.
Galloway was once named Trial Lawyer of the Year by a group called Public Justice, and he lived in a life of luxury with grand homes in Colorado, Washington, D.C., and Martha's Vineyard. But his wife Kathy says he would have traded it all to be one of those investigative reporters he admired so much.
I think he was so enamored of the work that you were able to do, Brian and Rhonda. He would have given his left pinky to be able to have half the talent that you had in journalism.
Do you still drink your tap water, or is this solely what you drink? Not really? Why not?
The water project from Ground Truth came as Galloway knew his days might be numbered. And he died knowing there were Galloway fellows across Appalachia and elsewhere doing the work he so admired.
He dreams of having a strong investigative journalism unit in every newspaper and radio station across America. He was a brilliant storyteller, and he would like to see those brilliant storytellers telling the public what's happening in their communities across the country. That would be a wish come true for him.
Tom Galloway was a strong supporter and a good friend to me and our executive producer, Rhonda Schwartz, and to so many journalists around the world. He will be missed, but his legacy will continue through the Galloway Foundation in the able hands of his wife, Kathy, and daughter, Erin. That's our program for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you right back here next week on the Law and Crime Network.